In this video, I show you how I planned my trip to Kruger National Park in South Africa. I started in the north, which was a big mistake. And the reason I started in the north because I didn't know much about the north or south part of the park. The north is literally 7 or 8 hours drive from Johannesburg. And it's the worst part of the park because it has very dry vegetation because of the type of plants that are in the north part. There are not that many animals there, so you kind of waste your time if you go to the north of the park, and it's too far from Johannesburg. So stay away from the north, and you don't see that many animals. It's just that area is not interesting for animals to exist. So it's very limited number of wildlife in the north. The body posture, stomach rumbling, as you can hear. Then from the north, I took another bus, which took literally 10 hours from north to come to the south. So I could totally bypass the north, and from Johannesburg, you can either fly to the south, because south part of Kruger National Park is a lot more interesting than the north, and there's a domestic flight. There's like a small airplane from the Johannesburg airport. You can fly directly to the south part of the gate, or you can just take the public transfer or ask your lodge for any recommendation they have for the transfer. It takes about 5 hours drive from Johannesburg to the south of the park. Most of the lodges are in the south part of the Kruger National Park. On TripAdvisor, when you put Kruger National Park, most of the highly rated and good lodges, most likely they are in the south because that's the popular area of the park. Then you have option for two types of accommodation. The super luxury accommodation, they are very expensive, and they are sometimes in a private reserve in the park. They are in the Kruger National Park, but in a private reserve. Private reserve has a lot more animals because they are private. They have ways to attract more animals by creating like artificial water hole, so animals, they come and drink water. So you see more animals when you are in the private reserve. When I took the bus from north to the south of Kruger National Park, which took about 10 hours, in the middle we had a stop here. This is a lodge, and I just had lunch there. The location of this lodge is not that great because it's somewhere closer to the north where there are not that many animals. And but this is just an example that most of the lodges in Kruger National Park, they have their own game drives. So you pay for their lodge, you pay for your room, and then you, if you decide to do game drives, they have different hours, morning or early in the morning, or in the afternoon, evening. And then they have different prices. So you can book your safari or game drive when you get there. Some of the fancy and expensive lodges, the game drive is included. So when you book, you can ask them if it's included or not. This is how I did my safari. I stayed at this hotel. This is about 12 kilometers from the south gate of the Kruger National Park. It's not in the park because the lodges in the park are either super expensive and fancy, like $600 a night, around that price, or they are really, really bad. So I stayed at this hotel, which is really nice hotel. It was very fancy. I think it was a 4-star, fantastic room. But it's not in the park. Because it's not in the park, it was cheap. It was about $50 per night. And then there's a 12-kilometer drive from the lodge to the gate of the south gate of the park. That way, I stayed at a nice place instead of those cheap and really bad lodges which are inside the park. So I stayed outside, and I stayed in a really nice hotel. And then the hotel, you can either book the game drive with them. They work with so many companies. There's a bunch of companies with different names. They all do the same thing, and you can book your safari with them. Your hotel can do it for you for extra fee, and then they can either bring you to the gate in the morning or whenever your game drive starts, or you can just take the Uber. Uber is very cheap in South Africa and is very safe. Either your lodge can book this safari for you, or the park itself also have their this service. You can directly book it with the park itself. That one, it's a hotel. It looks like a train, but it's a very expensive hotel inside the Kruger National Park. And most of these game drive, they go through pretty much the same route. If you are in a private reserve, because private reserve, the fancy one, are super expensive, they have their own game drive and they go off-road. Because they go off-road, you can see a lot more animals. But if you do the game drive the way I show it to you, it's cheaper, but then you don't see that many animals, because everyone, the private cars, all these safari cars, they're going through the same route, and then if they find an interesting animal, there's so many cars gather. So, and don't expect to see a lot of animals. Kruger National Park doesn't have that much animals compared to Serengeti or Ngorongoro in Tanzania. I did 2 full day safari from 5 in the morning. I left the hotel at 5 in the morning. It started at 6 till 4 p.m. And for 2 full day, the number of animals that I saw, they were not that many. And it was kind of disappointing, but that's Kruger National Park is just not as good as Serengeti in Tanzania. This is 5 in the morning that you have to be here around 5:30, and each group sits in their own safari. Pretty much they do the same thing, and sometimes you see the animals from very far distance. You barely can see them, which is pretty disappointing. So I didn't really like Kruger National Park that much, unless if you have a lot of money and you can do a private reserve in the park, then you will have a great experience. But if you want to do it budget or mid-range, the way I did it was mid-range. It wasn't budget really. It's not going to be a great safari experience. My recommendation is, if you really want to have a very good safari experience, go to Tanzania, because Tanzania has Serengeti has a lot, literally maybe 70% more animals than Kruger National Park.